The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Jillian Schaefer and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Fixed Assets Best Practices and New Features in 2021.1, presented by Jason Konopack of SWK Technologies. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise down. However, you can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. To submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this presentation and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees as well as to those who registered but were not able to attend. Please take a moment after the presentation to answer our one survey question. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you with software and industry knowledge, tools, and support whenever you need it. So whether you're here doing research for a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels. So we encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jason.
All right, thank you, Jolene. So as Jolene said, my name is Jason Konopack. I'm a senior consultant here with SWK. I work on the Sage 100 product as well as Sage Fixed Assets. And today we're going to be talking about Sage Fixed Assets. So just a quick little agenda. As Jolene mentioned, we're going to talk about some of the new features in the new 2021.1 version. I will backtrack a little and also cover some features that were introduced in 2021.0 in case you missed that. After that, we're going to go over, spend the rest of the time on best practices within Sage Fixed Assets, some things that I've discovered that are pretty useful and that maybe not everyone that I talk to or work with on their fixed assets environment knows about, and I find some things pretty useful. So I will dig into a handful of things there and show you some examples of how they work, and then we'll leave a little bit of time, hopefully at the end, for some questions. So without further ado, I will move on to the new features. So as I mentioned, 2021.0 is the official new version for fixed assets that came out in late 2020, probably around November, if I recall. And they really introduced most of the new features to the program at that point, whereas 2021.1 just rolled in some new tax updates. So one of the biggest features that they enabled is having up to 20 books. So if you were to look at one of your assets, you would see, depending on what you have active, you usually will see 7 books here. If they're a book that you're not currently using, it would be grayed out. But what you can do now in the new version is, number one, only display the books that you are currently using, which I'll show you in a little bit. But also, you can add up to 13 additional books to get yourself a total of 20 open books. I imagine most of you are saying, why would I ever need to use that? But there are a lot of people who have interstate businesses where they need to run multiple state books, for example. That's the most common scenario I've seen of my clients who would take advantage of this. And so you only currently have one state book, and then maybe you could use your custom books to track that as well. But by adding the up to 13 additional books, you can track as many states as you need. Maybe you want to have additional budgets, other things you may want to track. So to enable that, you can go to File and Edit Company. And then you are going to see your company listed here. And right down here is your new feature, Unused Books 13. That's that additional 13. We can simply click Add a Book, name that book, whatever we might want to call it. And then there we go. There's our new book. And then you can continue to rename them. That's a new feature for everything except for internal tax and ACE. It can be renamed. You can always go in and rename these. And then clearly at the bottom here, you have a delete button, which is a new feature as well. If you don't need that book anymore, you can just go ahead and delete it. And then what I briefly mentioned before is you can choose to have these closed books not display. So right now, the default for the new version is to not have this box checked, show closed books in asset detail. So if you don't want them to show, leave this unchecked. And so for instance, if I take my custom book 2, my 7th book, which you see in the background on my individual asset screen, if I change the open book to no, meaning it's closed, and then hit OK, it's going to disappear from my asset detail screen. So I'll do that. And there now book number custom 2 is no longer visible. So you can see that can neaten things up for your display and your visibility down here. A nice small little feature they've also added is to be able to drag and drop your column sizes here. So maybe even if you're not showing all the other books, maybe you want to keep your main ones on the far left with small little panels. Maybe you want to expand your main books all the way out. So common resize with columns you would see in any application, but that is a new feature. So that's the main thing. And because of the fact that they added the ability to have up to 20 books, a lot of your menus have also changed. So things where you would go in and select multiple books to allow for up to 20. So this screen will stay pretty much the same, but we'll scroll if you add multiple books here on your depreciation calculation. But on other screens where your books were previously listed left to right rather than in a vertical orientation, they've changed those to be a vertical orientation to match what we see here in your depreciation calculation. So that's the main feature that I wanted to show you for 21.0. And like I said, for 2021.1, the only new feature is not user interface related. It's purely updating the tax functionality. So I'm not a tax accountant. I'm not going to go into all the details on the specific changes and what has been modified, but you can find those on the Sage knowledge base in the release notes section if you're interested in those. One other change that those of you doing custom reports from scratch might want to take advantage of is the ability to add your tax ID number to your reports, to your custom reports. So that is a new feature. I already have Crystal Reports open. If you're familiar with Sage 100, you may already be using Crystal Reports. Sage Fixed Assets does use that same report engine to customize and generate custom reports. But you would access a completely new report by doing create new report and renaming one, or you can open an existing report and you just launch the RPT file, the Crystal Reports Designer file. Because this program is sometimes a little sluggish to open, I've already pre-launched it and gone ahead and designed myself a little report here. And so you can just like any Crystal report, grab your columns from the Field Explorer on the right. And what I wanted to show you what's added is under the company information tab, you can see you have your company name, the number, contact information, etc. The new field now here is your tax ID number. And so you can punch that into your report and do your formatting as you wish. And now you have that report or that field in reports, which we didn't until the 2021.0 version. So I'll minimize that. That is our quick section on updates for 2021. So I want to now change gears and move towards some best practices and some tips I have for you. So like I mentioned, these are some things that either they're fairly new and word hasn't gotten out to a lot of people, or things that when I find I'm assisting and supporting some of our SWK clients with fixed assets, I find they might not be taking advantage of some of these features. So one of the things that is, don't quote me on this, but probably about 2 or 3 years old, so it's not been around for a long time, but it's a very useful feature, is customizing your asset list screen. So those of you familiar with the program know you can modify the fields here, move them around, change your sorting. But one thing you can also do is add fields that are not here. So those of you using FAS may notice that we don't have any depreciation related fields here. These are all general info fields, fields that are mostly just text fields that don't factor into the actual calculations of depreciation, other than acquisition date. But what we can do is add fields to there under our Customize toolbar and Asset List. And then here we see our little left to right interface where we can choose which fields we want to show up on our list. So let's say we do internal book. That's the one that I most have clients working with. Say we want to see our current accum, our net book value, our estimated life, and our placed in service date. Oh, another one that's also very useful is current through date. I'll show you that one. So what we can do is move these around wherever we want to see them in here, just like you would with any other kind of column listing. I won't change the all because that's a lot of clicks, but if I hit OK, then we're going to see here that we have our columns now with a little star showing depreciation related fields. And then if you also look in the top right, you see that the star is related to internal book. So one thing you can't do is show both tax book and internal book, for instance, on these fields at the same time. But if you wanted to switch that, you can just very easily go into custom asset list and switch your book on this screen. So I think that's very practical. It can really help you get a good snapshot of where your assets are, especially if you've got hundreds or even thousands of assets and you want to analyze them by sorting by certain values, other things you may think of that are not provided by the normal reports and items within the program. But the one that I think is very useful as well is your through date. I'll just drag this one over a little bit so we can see it near some of our other fields. So through date, as those of you using the program may know, is the last date that you've done a calculation for, a depreciation calculation. And due to the data structure of fixed assets, you don't have a history record of depreciation. And those of you who I've worked with, you've probably heard me say this many times before. What we have in the database in the back end for any asset is just the results of the most recent calculation. So what that means is if I've calculated these assets through February of 2021, I don't have a record, a data table in here anywhere that shows me what we had calculated in any prior month. So like March of 2018, we can't just look up that data. We only store one date's worth of values for each asset. So long story short, what I recommend for whenever you're going to run your next period is to go ahead and run a depreciation for the prior period, unless you can now use this new tool and sort by our through date. And so now we can just catch any assets that don't fit the bill. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hey, these, we know they don't have a through date. They haven't been calculated yet because they were acquired. And if I looked at the place in service date, most likely it's similar or same as the acquisition date. They haven't been depreciated yet, so that's fine. And then we see through date for all these other ones, disposals and transfers or inactive assets. So once they're disposed, inactivated, or transferred, they no longer participate in the calculations, and that date is pretty much locked. And then we can scroll down this list and quickly get an eyeball of where our assets have been calculated through, what date they've been calculated through. And so that's very useful to find out where you stand. Prior to this, if you weren't doing this, I would always recommend, if I were now running March, for instance, I would just go ahead and calculate February one more time and just make sure that I don't have any stragglers. that haven't been fully calculated to that month prior to what I'm doing. Because if I don't, if I have an asset calculated through January and then I run March, I'm going to stuff 2 months worth of depreciation into my March calculation. So we don't want to do that. We want to always have 1 month, presumably. There's certainly other circumstances. Maybe you do it yearly, but in most situations, we're going to want to do month by month. So I can just do that, run a calculation. You may have caught that I unchecked this send to window button. So in fast terms, this translates to give me a preview of the report, pop it up on the screen. And so when you want to save time, you're just running a calculation. You don't need to see this on screen in that case. If I were then to run March, then yeah, I might want to view my depreciation expense report and even print it or export it, and then I would do that. Okay, so that's our asset list customization and a little bit of a tangent on your calculations and some recommendations there. So I want to go back to customizing some fields. And I'm going to go ahead and just sort this by system number once more. Find one of these assets that is still in service. Yes. And so when we customize fields, we have a lot of different features at our disposal here. So I should mention that this is all a demo company provided by Sage that gives us all this data. So this is made up data, but what they have done in this database is use some customized features that you may not have in your environment. So I want to show you a couple of things in here. So first off, we see class is bold. So why do we think class is bold? Well, that's what happens when you mark a field required. So internally, you may have certain requirements where some fields in here, you desperately need your employees entering FAS assets to enter information and not forget it. So it won't allow you to save the asset if you don't have a required field filled in. And so how do you do that? We do customize fields. And then we see a list of all of our general info fields. That's all of the fields in the top half of our asset detail screen. You can see what stands out to the eye at first here is all of the custom fields. So we are allowed to do 2 custom dates, and then we can do up to 10 custom text fields. They all can be up to 25 characters. Unfortunately, nothing can be longer than 25 characters. So in certain circumstances, you may need to abbreviate if you have custom fields that need to be longer. So you can see, for instance, custom field 1 is state, and that entry mask is 2 characters long. And then when we see here, going back up to view, allow entry is the normal set. You can see we also have require entry, and that's what we've done with the class field. So if I click this, it's set to require entry for class, and that's also 2-digit. So if I were to say, let's also make the asset ID required, I can do the same thing, hit that to require, hit OK, and boom, now that's bold. And then if I were to enter a new asset, or maybe even just change this one and try to save it, it's going to say the field is required. So if you have a lot of people using FAS and they're not entering the right information, take advantage of that required field. I'm going to go back to the asset list just so I get the original asset ID back. I'm not going to save that change, but I'll just jump right back into it. And then another very useful data error preventing feature is the SmartList. So you may have seen when I clicked on the class field here, we get a drop box. And so these fields are not pre-coded by the system. This is something that the demo data has after a fictional user has set this up. And what this does is means when the user selects a value here, they're not able to enter their own information, right? So it has to fit some of the predetermined fields. And that prevents people from making a misentry. The most practical way that that is used is in the asset accounts. So those of you automatically importing your journal entries from FAS into your ERP system, such as Sage 100, you may know the difficulty of not having the account set up properly in here. So for instance, with this account, for the asset account, 01-100-1450, what if somebody leaves out the hyphens? What if somebody leaves off that leading 001? Then your Sage 100 or other ERP that you're integrated with is not going to read that account properly, and it's going to fail on the journal entry, and you have to go into FAS and find the errors. So to prevent those errors, you can use the SmartList as well. So you can see for the asset accounts, we've only included asset accounts that we approve of, right? And so those can be managed under Customize Custom Fields. And since I was looking at that, it goes right to my GL asset account. And we've got this checkbox for Activate SmartList. And then we can go into SmartList Manager. And so what we see here is some information already set up. This fictional person with the demo data has already done this for us. But in your systems, you can go in and just start entering your accounts. You only have to do this the one time, and then all users in the future would be able to select these from the list, and then you really reduce your chances of errors with these fields anytime you're using SmartList. You can see some other features here. So we do have the option to, for this field, it's turned on to restrict entry to only this list we've provided, but we can have the option to add an entry to the list. So if you're just starting out, there's going to be more variety in the validation list, then you can just allow users to start adding them, and then they'll be able to, you can decide if they confirm or if it automatically adds it. But what that'll do is add to this list and then become one of the approved fields. But if you don't want that to happen, keep that unrestricted. All right, so that's SmartLists. I do really recommend you use those for your GL accounts and anything else that you don't want any entry mistakes to happen. And then the last thing on our customized fields I want to show you is, well, two things. The message here, the message is not something that is typically very commonly taken advantage of. And I think there's a legitimate reason for that, because it's a small little message. So see here that says enter the account number to which the asset is assigned. If I go over to my field here, you can see at the very bottom on my status bar, and apologies, I have pretty high resolution, this might be small, it says enter the account number to which the asset is assigned. So there's a little pop-up. So if you do want to modify this, you can go ahead and change that in your SmartList. Or not in your SmartList, but in your customized list. And then lastly, you can change the entry order. So let's look at something like one of these custom dates. So warranty date. We see this is used as a custom field, and in the bottom here, we see entry order 12. And so if you wanted to rearrange this screen, you say we want warranty date to be closer to the top, maybe we move it to third, hit OK, and now it's moved. It switched places with class and moved up there. If you wanted to fully reorder, you'd want to keep the customized window open and modify them individually as they move around. But you can see that is another option there for changing the order. Okay, so that is our customizations that I wanted to show you. And now, probably one of the most common issues that I'm working with clients on is adjustments to assets. So there are a few different ways you can adjust assets. The most common situation is where you've made a change to the asset after it's already been in place and depreciation has already happened, and we find out that we need to change its acquisition value or the estimated life, and we need to change some value about the asset. Going back to my comments before about the data structure of the program, that we only keep one historical record or one current record of the asset's depreciation status and all those values. So if we look at, let me find one of our newer assets. If we look at our book fields down here, we can see that we've got this asset calculated through February 21, and it was last calculated in January 21. This is the extent of all the information the program stores about this asset, everything that you see here. So you're not, as I said, you're not going to be able to find March 2018 statuses. So whenever you make an adjustment, if you can make that adjustment now rather than trying to go back in time and recalculate, now is best, meaning in our current period. Because if we're trying to go back and recorrect things, we may not get the same values if we rerun depreciation and try to rerun our reports, because the system's not going to know that the values we had done prior are the values you want to lock in. So long story short being, if you can at all help it, whenever you're making adjustments, try to have them reflected as of the current period and not as of a prior period. That's when you're probably going to have to call us and help you through the issue, because it gets complex. And I don't have the time here to show you a full example of that. But if you are going to be making adjustment, I'll show you a simple one here. So say that this asset, we'll just work with the internal book for now, is going to go from $620 to $700. And so we're going to get an alert that, hey, we're changing one of our critical fields, these top 5 here. We want to be careful whenever we're changing any of these, so we just get a warning. In this case, yes, I want to go ahead and make the change. And then here's where we can choose when on this asset's time frame we want the change to start taking place. And so again, if you can at all help it, the best is going to be current through date, because all that's going to do is make an adjustment in your next calculation. But you see, you can go all the way back to your place in service date. If you have a beginning date in place, this one does not. You could go back to there. If we've imported new assets into your system that have been depreciated elsewhere, you might have a beginning date. You would also have a beginning date if you've previously made an adjustment like this on the asset. And then you can see right here, if I choose current through date, it's going to set those beginning amounts into those fields. So we'll see that in a second. There we go. Now we have beginning. So I don't love the terminology. I guess that's technically correct in the fixed assets world, but I would love if this was a milestone date or a stopping off date or a bookmark date, something like that, because this is just showing us what depreciation was through February of 2021, and then we're going to essentially wall off any calculations prior to then, unless we undo this beginning date value. So now any adjustments we make are going to be calculated going forward in March. And so what I would like to do here is show you a couple of different options for reflecting this adjustment. So by default, out of the box, the default value for your adjustments is going to be no adjustment taken. So if I go ahead and calculate this asset through March, it's not going to catch up on that $80 increase to the acquisition value I did. It's going to continue depreciating, not as if it's $620, as if it's $700, but it's going to do the monthly calculation. So $700 divided by 5 years, which is 60 months. So 700 divided by 60. It will do that calculation each month now, rather than the result it gets from 620 over 5 years. So that means that our asset never catches up, and we're going to have an undepreciated asset at the end of its life. So we have a few different options. So I will first show you what we can do within the company settings. And I'll save those changes because we're going to work with this. So in your edit company, you can go to your book overrides tab. And then for each company, this one, since its demo data has been changed, but out of the box, this will be set to no. I'm going to switch this back to no for now. And that's, as I said, is going to just calculate going forward as if it was 700. So I'll do a quick calculation on just this asset. Asset 86 through February. I'm going to change through March. I'm not going to review the report. I just want to see the effect here. And so we see depreciation this run in my first new month is 1167. If I get out my calculator, since during a webinar I can't do that in my head. Oh, excuse me. There it is. So 700 divided by 60 is our 1166. So that's what we would expect without any adjustment. So you can imagine at the end of the day, you don't want that because you want to catch up on that $80 depreciation that was left over. So let's go ahead and revert this back to February, and we'll do another method. Okay, so now we're where we stood before. We do see a depreciation this run because it did calculate with the old value. But now let's change our company setting just for the internal book for demonstration purposes here. I'm going to do an immediate adjustment. And so what that means is it's going to catch up all of that $80 right now in my next month. So now I will redo March. No need to see a report. We do our calculation. We didn't quite get where we needed to be. Let's see. Now we do have a period close that I should lift. Okay, so let's recalculate this. With no adjustment. Okay, we're back where we were. Immediate. And now let's calculate March. Something in my setup is not right. I apologize. That should be catching up our $80 under depreciated amount right away. Some of you are probably screaming at the screen wondering what I'm missing here. But normally I would expect that to be our original $11 from the $700 calculation plus the $80 that we increased the asset by to do an immediate adjustment. I would expect that to be $91.67. I'm not sure what was wrong with my setup here, but that at least illustrates the option for changing your adjustments. And then the last adjustment option here is post-recovery. And so that'll do the same thing as immediate. It'll make up that $80 that we were under depreciated. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we don't need to catch up all $80 by then. My mistake. I was thinking of the wrong thing. We caught up by the about $2.70 that we were under depreciated, as if we were through that point. So 620 over, yeah, it's just 3 months. It's January to March. So in those 3 months, instead of 11 per month, we were calculating a 10 per month. So yeah, we were just short by around 270, and we've made that up. My apologies for the confusion there. So with our immediate adjustment, we've added those couple of bucks that we were under depreciated in our first few months of life with the asset. With that said, with the post-recovery, it would catch up the $80 because what this is going to do is continue calculating at that new $11.67 per month based on the 700, and it'll finish its life in an undepreciated state. But what post-recovery is going to do is, before fully inactivating the asset, it's going to add a adjustment in the first month of the year after it's fully depreciated. So in this one, since it's 5 years, it would be completed by If we back up, it would be completed by December 2025. And so in January 2026 is when you would see that full $80 catch up to bring it up to the $700. I don't see a lot of folks choosing that as an option in the real world, but depending on your needs, that may be an option you'd want to take there. And then I want to show you one last adjustment option. And this one is very useful if you want to have assets catch up, whether they're over or under depreciated. So currently the immediate or post-recovery adjustments allow you to catch up an under depreciated asset. So in the case where we've increased its value but have not made up that value month by month in our depreciation calculation. If we have, say we took that 620 and reduced it to $500, then we would be in an over depreciated state, and there would be no way for the system to make a catch up to reduce depreciation to where it would be at zero net book value at the end of its life. And so the only way to do that would be to change the depreciation method. And so what we can do there is change our method from one of our straight lines, which you'll probably have, to a remaining value calculation. And what this simply does is say, what is our current net book value of the asset? So it'll look down here. Let me just make this change. It'll look down here at net book value, so 665. And how many periods do we have left? So 5 years minus 3 periods. So it's going to take that 665 divided by 47 months or 57 months, and it's going to smooth that out. And so it's going to be a constant depreciation rate month by month, as long as you don't make any further adjustments. So it's nice for your books that it's constant, but it does not, it by definition ends up fully depreciated because it's always just checking that net book value and the time left and bringing it down to zero. So that's a very useful feature that was added to the program about 4 or 5 years ago, and that method really helps with making some more customized adjustments to your assets. All right, one thing I wanted to also give you as a tip here is how to deal with disposals if you are reversing them. So you can see in this demo data, we've got disposed and transferred assets, and through the normal course of your processing of your FAS depreciation calculations, you'll come to the point where you do disposals and go through your calculation, and that's fine. I've demonstrated that on other webinars, and we could certainly work through that individually if you'd like help with doing disposals. So I'm not going to show you that here, but what I did want to show you is how to properly handle reversing a disposal and getting the asset back on track with its depreciation calculations. So, well, I will go ahead and dispose an asset. Let's just make sure we've got one with life remaining. That's fine. All right, so I'll dispose of this one. We'll do today's date. That's fine. All right, we'll just do a sale. We'll do a casualty, no revenue come back, and we'll post this. All right, so I'll go to the transaction tab. So those of you familiar with disposals, you'll see we've got a record of our disposal. And this was one of our assets that was calculated through February in our example there. And so if we go back to our main tab, we see everything's grayed out because it's disposed, so it won't be factoring into any future calculations. If we scroll down here, we see that, remember, we had previously calculated through February, but now, since we did our disposal, FAS has determined, hey, we need to record the depreciation for those months where this asset was still active in March, April, and May, and June as well. And it's going to do a depreciation this run. So first tip here is do not dispose ahead of time. Always dispose in the month you're currently working on. So say if you're, right now it's June in real life and it's the second of the month, so I doubt you're all done, but theoretically you could be through May right now. If your books are only through, say, February in real life, and you do a disposal because you got rid of the asset today, this is going to mess up how you're going to calculate February, or at least March, April, and May, right? Because you've got this depreciation that that is being calculated for June, but is not being slotted in for any of those intervening months. And so the first step there, don't depreciate ahead of time, even if it's now in the real world. Wait till your books catch up, make a note on the asset, whatever you need to do, or first catch up your books and do the disposal, because it's going to complicate things and you're going to have to unwind it anyway. So say we are in that case and we need to delete this disposal. Many of you have probably already done this. We'll delete last transaction, and now the asset is no longer disposed. On a side note, if people are doing this, you can still see this here. You can see the history tab with the transaction record of what happened. You can get the full detail on the values and the amounts as well. And you can see who did it. It's just me and my local login to the virtual machine. But you can see now there's no transaction on the transaction tab because this asset is not disposed anymore. And we're back to a fully editable state here. But what we do see is, as a result of that disposal, this asset is now current through June. And so in order to get this back in line with all of our other assets so that it can properly be calculated for March, we'll want to, anytime we reverse a disposal, go ahead and recalculate to whatever prior month is relevant to your situation. So in this case, we had already calculated February, so I'm just going to go back and recalculate February. And then there we go. Now we've got our current through date through February, and we can proceed, roll through March, April, May, and then do our disposal on June 2nd once we've closed out May. So that's the thing I've seen trip some people up before. So just wanted to make as many people as I can aware of that issue there. All right. So wanted to show you some other things I've found. A lot of people aren't taking full advantage of their customized reports feature. So to customize reports in FAS, you do need to be in one of two circumstances. Either you've purchased the premier version of fixed assets, which has a SQL data store in the back end. If you have that, then you also should get the license from Sage for custom reporting. If you don't have the premier, then it would be bought separately. If you are interested, you can certainly reach out to your SWK account manager to talk about adding that on. So to customize reports, the things that are available in the base model without adding the reporting module would be things that you see here on this main tab. So you can format the report, you can group the report. So say I wanted to see depreciation expense grouped by class. I can do that ascending order of class. Yeah, I'll put subtotals in. I can choose to break the page, move on to the next group, or keep it on the same page if I undo that check. So that you can do. You could preview the report layout, but you can't really do too much else with it there. I won't run the report because reports always take 30 seconds and we only have about 15 minutes left, so I don't want to run that. But that's how you can group your reports. That's available in any version of FAS. What you don't have available are, number one, this customized report option here, which I'll show you in a second. And you also don't have what I showed earlier, the Crystal reports, where you can create reports from scratch or edit existing reports within Crystal Designer. So that needs your report manager in order to work. Report module. So if I go back to one of my reports here, this customized report is also part of the report module. And here, this is a little bit of a challenging interface. In the back of my mind, I'm hoping at some point Sage gives us a more visual version of this. But for now, you can see we've got our fields in the report listed. We've got the width of each of the columns for those fields. So you kind of have to get a feel for how wide the fields need to be in order to display all the information fully. You can always just check back with your layout here. In this case, this report layout tab is very useful because that will help you design your report and check where it is. You can also edit with free-form text on your header and your footer if you wanted to modify this. And then here you can add or remove columns with this arrow based on your list here. You can reduce the list to just specific classes of fields here if you wanted to make that easier to find what you're looking for. And so what Sage does for us here is calculates our total width of all our columns. With the built-in report, of course, we are at exactly the amount of space we need. If, say, we added a new column, maybe we want to add asset ID because system ID is just not as useful to you. And if we wanted to add that, see, that's a 1-inch wide field by default, and we are over by 1 inch and 5/10 because we have a 5/100 because we have a column space of 0.05 there. So if we wanted to reduce that, we needed to either take another field out, reduce our individual widths, or reduce our column spacing, but that's only going to get us so far. And then what you can also do is reduce your margins if you really want to push the limits of your page. You can also just flip it to landscape because all these reports are pretty much going to start in portrait mode. You flip it to landscape and then we've got more room. Well, it reduced our column space. So there, now we've got the room. So that's one thing you can do as well. And I think that's pretty much all I want to show you here. But yeah, just keep in mind you have this option. You can go in here and view the status of your reports. You don't have to run it to test it. But yeah, play around with this if you own it. If you don't and you'd like to start adding your own custom fields in here, remember you can create your own fields and add them to this report. So you don't have to stick with the fields that Sage has provided with the program. You can start to customize a lot more. By definition, none of these fields are going to be in your standard fields because Sage is not going to display them if you're not using them. So if you have custom fields, using the custom reporter is a great way to add them to your reports as well. Okay, I just want to spend a couple of extra minutes before we take questions on showing you some of the basics for backing up and handling your company files within the program. So one of the things I'm also always letting people know about is keeping backups of your companies. So remember that point I keep mentioning, that we don't have historical data within our program. We only have the current status of the asset, everything that you see on the asset detail screen. So that means, number one, whenever you're running a period and there are important things to your company, such as the expense report, the GL posting, any other reports that you may want to run from here, or your custom reports, run those, back them up as PDFs or Excel files so you have them as a reference. Always good to know where you were at some previous period if you need to. So that's one thing. The other is to back up your company files. So what I generally recommend is, at the very minimum, make an archive at the end of every year. And so if I were to do that, I can do a couple of things to make a backup. So on one hand, I can back up to a file, and you can save this on a server somewhere or even on a cloud, because these are generally going to be pretty small files if you don't have a very large database of assets and companies. So company utilities and backup company, it's going to close the company. And I can even select multiple companies at once. So select all, I'm going to back up all my demo companies. Hit next, I'll just save it to the backup. You can say FAS, whatever you want to name the file, 2021-06-02. So that's, if you use a structure like this, that's going to be pretty easy to follow when the backup was made. So we can do that. Scroll bar quickly through here. In your company with live data, it might take a little longer, but be patient. I've never seen one of these fail as long as the database was intact. So you'll get this message here. And I'm not going to perform another backup. But if I just pop open my desktop on this virtual machine, there's my file, a 3 megabyte file, not too big. So that's pretty easy for backing up. You can even upload it to a backup online, whatever you do. I think that's pretty flexible. So that's one way. Now, that's not a backup that you can see in your system. If you do need to restore from that backup, you can do restore company, and that's going to give you the option to overwrite your existing company. So if you are doing that, you got to be careful that you don't restore over good data. So you may want to make a further backup of your live data before you restore. It is also good, just to be sure, if that backup file is very important to you and you need to keep it, would be to restore it, do a test restore right after you've backed it up. And you may want to do that into a separate database. I'll show you that in a second. So what I can also do is do a copy company. And here you only can do this individually. But say I want to make a copy of this company and I create a database. So you can do new database, name it whatever you like. I already named that one called archives. And so then you can start using this as a place to store your year-end backups, or even more frequently quarter-end or month-end. That way you can always refer back to those environments if you need to. And so here I can just do copy, and I'll copy the company. Pretty straightforward there. And then once that's done, you can go into that company and rename it. Say you might want to rename it backup year-end 2021, whatever it might be. So you can see here I'm in my archives database, and there's my sample US company. Better illustrated here if I change databases. So here's where I started in the default database. Switch to archives. And there's that backup company. So you could go into here and rename this, which I'd recommend. Whatever we want to call it. Anything you like. Okay. So you can see at the top here now, that's a renamed company. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. So along those same lines, I would also recommend whenever you're coming up with a struggle, whether you need to make an adjustment or you're making a big modification, maybe you're doing a lot of imports to overwrite data, anything like that, you want to either do that backup company, which I showed you, which creates the file on your computer. You may also want to copy and create a backup or a test company using that same method. So don't feel like you have to struggle through something new that you've never tried and you don't know what the result is going to be. Just make a backup, make a test company to play around with. You have all of your live data there to work with, and then there's no concern if you make a mistake in that backup company. Of course, I recommend always keeping an eye on this top bar, making sure you are in your live company and your live database when it comes time to actually do real life processing. So don't get caught doing real work in the backup database. Okay, so I think we covered a lot there. We have about 7 minutes before the top of the hour. So we all got some good information there. And if there are any questions in the next 7 minutes, I can make an attempt to answer them.
Thank you, Jason. We'll now open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar. And just a reminder, everyone, we do have a subject matter expert here. This is a great opportunity to have your questions answered in real time. We'll give that about a minute just in case any come through.
Okay.
Give it another 30 seconds.
Well, I'll say if we don't have any questions for now, feel free to keep adding them. I'm not ending the meeting. Just want to let you know if you do have any questions that come up after the webinar, or if you're watching this on the recording and not asking live questions, please feel free to reach out to us, reach out to your account manager or to me directly if you have my contact information. And yeah, we'd be glad to help you out.
Thanks, Jason. And it doesn't look like we have any questions. I guess you were just so thorough. Just give me 1 minute as I take back screen control.
Maybe so, or maybe thoroughly confusing, but we'll see.
One more second. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for your informative presentation and for taking the time to be here today. And thank you everyone for attending our webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day.